Hello. We are going to spend a little bit of time discussing airspace. The FAA is responsible for the National Airspace System. They are responsible for the control and use of airspace in the United States. They developed the system to establish a safe environment for aircraft to operate in. As you can see from the picture, airspace exists in a variety of different shapes and altitudes. It can be circular or cylindrical in shape, and it can also follow the terrain, as shown on the left-hand side of the picture. When you think about airspace, I want you to think of it like a puzzle. When you're putting a puzzle together, do you want it to look like the picture on the left, where the pieces all overlap each other? Or do you want it to look like the picture on the right, where the pieces butt up against each other, but don't overlap? I think we can agree that we want our puzzles to look like the picture on the right. Just like that picture, airspace is going to butt up against each other, but it's never going to overlap. What I mean is that you'll never have two different types of airspace at the same altitude. They can touch each other, but they can't overlap. Airspace is also like a puzzle in another way. When you get done putting your puzzle together, do you want it to look like the picture on the left, where there's a missing piece or a gap? Or do you want it to look like the picture on the right, where everything is filled in? We want it to look like the picture on the right. What this means is that for airspace, there are no gaps. From the surface on up to 60,000 feet, airspace exists. You just have to determine the different class that exists at the altitude you're looking at. The types of airspace are determined by a couple of different factors. One of them is the amount of traffic operating in and out of the airport. For example, an airport like O'Hare, which is extremely busy, is going to have a different type of airspace than a small rural airport that may only see one or two airplanes operating in and out of there on a daily basis. ATC services, or air traffic control services, also differentiate the different types of airspace. An airport with an operating control tower and radar services is going to have a different type of airspace than one that only has an operating control tower but no radar services. You can also have airspace that have neither of these services available, so no control tower and no radar services. All of them are differentiated by different classes of airspace. Weather minimums also help determine the type of airspace that exists. At busier airports, you want to be able to see further to identify the air traffic quicker. See and avoid is the primary means of aircraft avoidance for manned aircraft. So the further you can see, the quicker you can identify a potential collision hazard. For the types of airspace, there are two different categories: controlled and uncontrolled airspace. Controlled airspace means that services are available to aircraft operating under IFR or instrument flight rules. Due to these weather conditions, IFR pilots are essentially operating in the clouds, so they cannot see and avoid each other. So ATC, or air traffic control, will provide traffic separation. In uncontrolled airspace, these traffic separation services are not offered. So why do we need to know about airspace? Well, as a commercial operator, we have to abide by FAR 107.41. This regulation tells us that we need permission to operate in Class B, C, or D airspace. We also need permission to operate commercially in Class E airspace when it extends down to the surface by an airport. If we need permission to operate in these different classes of airports, it's important that commercial operators can identify the airspace so they know whether they can legally operate there or not. In summary, I'd like you to think of airspace like a puzzle. Airspace should never overlap each other, and there should be no missing pieces. The different classes of airspace are determined by a variety of things, including the amount of traffic operating at the airport, air traffic control services, including an operating control tower and radar services, and the different weather minimums that are required for manned aircraft. We need to be able to identify the different classes of airspace so that as commercial operators, we can determine if we need permission to operate in that particular class of airspace. Now that we've laid the framework for the different types of airspace, we're going to move forward by determining the different classes that exist.